Hello and welcome to another episode of Armored Warfare with your host, Czar Peppers. Today's video was inspired by a comment I received on the Best Team Ever video that I did a little while ago for just a little fun, which you can watch right here. Basically saying that by using artillery in a PVE match, I wasn't being very helpful to my team. To which I said, challenge accepted. Now, I'm not trying to be bitter about this or anything. I think that he or she genuinely raised an interesting question. Is artillery useful in a PvE match? And if not, should Obsidian make it so you can't use artillery in a PvE match? I have to admit that the couple of times that I have tried out artillery in PvE matches, it has been pretty useless, but nothing motivates me like somebody telling me that it can't be done. So I did a little research into self-propelled gun tactics and a little brainstorming, and once I was ready I fired up Armored Warfare and hit record. But before we try and answer that question, let's talk about what a self-propelled gun actually is and what role they generally play in a combat situation. The simplest way to look at it is a self-propelled gun is basically a howitzer mounted on a tracked or wheeled chassis and can be maneuvered under its own power, whereas your traditional artillery or howitzer requires to be moved into place by another vehicle or animal if you want to go far back enough. The self-propelled gun is a combat support weapon employed in support of or attached to the primary combat units, either being infantry or armor. The advantages to their superior mobility are obvious. They can be moved to where they're needed in short notice, and can be moved quickly between barrages in order to avoid counter battery fire or shoot and scoot tactics, something that comes into play in Armored Warfare's mechanics. In most PvP matches, even though artillery does move around a little bit because they have to, they generally still hang out at the back of the map. When you try and do the same thing in a PvE mission, especially one with lots of buildings, the small size of the map can make it almost impossible to get effective fire onto your target. But I don't think that means that artillery can't be useful to your team when in PvE. You just have to change your attitude about it and try out some different tactics. So I'm going to try a few things out on the same map that I was on in the video in question, along with another map too. Between the two maps that I'm using, I think they do a pretty good job at reflecting the different kinds of maps that you'll encounter in most PvE missions. The self-propelled gun that I'll be using for today's experiment is the 2S1 Gvozdyka, which served in the Soviet military from 1971 to 1991 and the Russian military until today. It mounts a 122mm to A18 howitzer on what is basically an elongated version of the MT-LB-ABC, capable of firing HE, leaflet, rocket-assisted projectiles, armor-piercing HE, and chemical rounds, but in Armored Warfare I believe it's only HE and smoke that are available. Like most Cold War-era Russian military equipment, it is used by a large number of countries other than Russia, such as Algeria, Belarus, Cuba, Finland, Poland, Ukraine, and the list goes on. Belarus, that's it. The main reason I'm using this particular self-propelled gun is because it has the speed necessary to keep up with my team as they move up along the map, and that is certainly a factor that will be critical if you want to do this yourself. Next, what are the conditions that need to be met in order to call this experiment one way or another? Even in a PvP match with artillery, you usually can't expect to be doing tons of damage and end up at the top of your team, so I'm not going to expect that from a PvE match either. So my criteria will be based on whether or not I manage to get scores comparable to the average score of my other teammates. I also want to make sure that I wasn't just going around using the self-propelled gun as a tank, shooting at everything with direct fire. Otherwise, I could be just using a tank and getting better results. So even though I'll allow a little bit of shotgunning, I have to be primarily using the indirect fire mode. So here we are in the first match on the same map that I was on in the video that inspired this whole thing. Instead of staying at the back with my just alone, I'm moving up with my teammates. I know that enemies are going to be coming on this capture point here. So I'm just peeking around this building and I can get shots on the tanks coming into the circle. Aim time's a bit long on this thing. Now this was a good first target because this is something that my teammates with their armor piercing and heat rounds aren't going to be able to penetrate right away, so I can do some early damage with my high explosive shells for my teammates to then finish the job. Now you can't see because I'm in the indirect fire mode, but in between shots I've been pulling back behind that building. Got a BMP coming in. I'm still... The one nice thing about being this close to the targets is there's a very short amount of delay between the time I fire the shot and it actually hits the target. So you can... I find it's actually quite a bit easier to hit targets that way. Now we are doing damage. We're doing damage to these modules. But you can see here it is a bit tricky because, you know, these trucks are in the way because my firing arc isn't very high. But again, I'm still managing to get ordnance on the targets. So what I plan on doing is just moving up with my team and staying just behind them. Being able to hit the targets that they're spotting. Of course, I am relying on my team to spot these targets, but I'm really not having any problem getting ordnance on them. Nor am I coming under fire from them. This is another Ramka coming in and a good target for me to do damage to. As you can see, there we go. One target down. Because the Ramkas have the active, or what's it called, reactive armor, which defeats armor piercing rounds, and it also has composite armor, which defeats heat rounds. So my HE rounds are quite instrumental in doing the damage necessary and also taking out those reactive armor panels, allowing my team's armor piercing rounds to do damage. Now we're moving on to the next area but I'm still managing to get ordnance on the targets. My teammates are moving up on the left side of the map. Now what I'm doing in order to make sure I have shots is I'm looking at the map and making sure I have a clear line of sight between the buildings in order to, you know, hit them. Now here I've got to move up. And this is the key to doing this in a PVE match, is you have to keep moving up with your team, staying just behind them. And a lot of thinking ahead. It also helps if you sort of know the flow of these missions like I do, because I've played them so much.
Do not let them land their birds here.
And another one down. Now it's time to move up. And when you're in situations where you're not able to get fire on these targets, don't forget to do counter barrages on the enemy artillery. Usually your team will just have to deal with incoming artillery fire until they get to the back of the map and can take out the artillery. With artillery on your team, there's a pretty good chance the AI artillery will be taken care of within pretty short order. And as you can see, this tank is coming up behind my teammates. So I'm trying to do some damage on him. Or her. Lots of module damage there, allowing my teammates to take it out after it had been detracked. Now this guy's in a bit of a tricky area because right behind that sand dune.
Forget the competition.
Now I'm not able to
You're
get
running
fire
out
on
of
him,
time.
but that's not a problem because I can move. But in this scenario, I figured I would just wait and see if he'd come out to a area where I could hit him. But now it's time to move up. So yeah, having the speed is key to this and being able to keep up with your teammates. I know that other tier 4 artillery is pretty slow, and I'm not sure it would really work very well in this scenario because you'd be constantly catching up. But with this one, it's not too bad. And you just have to support your teammates in a more direct role, staying pretty close to them. Again, I'm in a position to just make sure to get in an area where there's no buildings in my firing arc. Which this position isn't, obviously. Granted, you're not always going to be able to get fire on your targets, but I'm sure by this point I've proven that you can get your shots on enough for it to be useful. I do really like how artillery has been done in Armored Warfare. It's a lot more interesting than it is in World of Tanks. In fact, it sounds like World of Tanks, or the people are actually thinking about sort of copying this style of artillery, which I suppose is fair considering how much this has been inspired by World of Tanks. Now this was the only part that I found really tricky, was trying to get fire on the last section of this map, because you have that dip around where the capture zone is. But again, it's just a case of moving around a little bit until you find you can get a shot. You just have to change your tactics to suit the environment. And here we go, a successful mission. Some money, some rep, and there we go. Not at the top, but certainly averaging the same as the other teammates. I also did another round on this map just to make sure that it wasn't a fluke, and much the same results as from the first match. So now I move on to map number 2, and this map sort of represents the more open PVE matches. Unfortunately, I forgot to hit record at the beginning of this match, so this is a minute or two in. And again, I'm staying just behind my teammates, if not right up with them, and doing damage to targets to help them take stuff out. Now it's worth mentioning that later tier artillery will also have stuff like smoke. Will also have stuff like smoke and illumination rounds, which should be incredibly helpful for teammates on PvE missions, especially the illumination rounds. I think by this point I was feeling a bit cocky, heading up in front of my teammates. But not like it went all that badly either. Not really that much to talk about, it's not all that complicated, just stay up, move up with your team, work your shots in between buildings, and, well, that's it. And you'll be a valuable member of your team. Yes, sometimes you do get a lot, you're aiming at a target and it gets taken out before you can aim or reload. That happens, but, you know, that happens in a tank too. And your large caliber high explosive rounds can do damage to some vehicles that your teammates may not be able to damage right away with armor piercing or heat rounds. Of course, the gun depression on this thing is pretty terrible, which is a little bit of an issue. And now here we are, coming to the end of the match, still alive, team still doing well. I mean, sure, one could make the argument that if you were in a tank or something else, you would be doing a more effective job than you would be in artillery, but what I'm trying to show here is that even if you're an artillery, you're not useless to your team. You can do plenty to help. And that's really the whole point of this. It's actually pretty fun too. I really started to enjoy it after a while. That close range, close support artillery, staying with your team right near the front. And it was always fun doing stuff like that. I know I wasn't supposed to be doing that much, but yeah, it's just too much fun. But so there we have it. Another match of doing damage which was comparable to the other people on my team. So what's the conclusion going to be? I think it's going to be, yeah, you can use artillery or self-propelled guns in a PVE match and still be a contributing member to your team. However, that said, you still rely on your teammates to do the spawning. Without them, you're pretty much dead. So if you end up with a team who just F's off and does whatever they want, ignoring the cap circle, then yeah, you're not going to be very useful to your team. But if you have a team who's doing what they're supposed to be doing and, you know, actually attacking the enemy and spotting them, then you can get fire on targets. You just have to maneuver through the buildings and find areas where your firing arc can successfully hit the targets. It's really not that difficult. So if you want to use artillery in a PvE match, go ahead. But, you know, you just have to think about it. And don't get into old habits of just hanging out at the back of the map and trying to hit people from there, because it's not going to work. You need to be moving forward with your team, staying relatively closely behind them. If you're spotted, be sure to take cover while reloading, because you don't have much health and you don't have any armor, so you're going to be taking out in a relatively short period of time. Pay close attention to the map in order to find clearings in between buildings and other objects, and be sure to be doing counter barrage fire on the AI artillery that is going to be bugging your teammates throughout the match. If you check all of those boxes, then you will most likely be a contributing member to your inevitable victory. So what do you think? Do you use artillery in PvE matches? Do you think that it can be useful, or do you think that I'm full of crap and, you know, it's stupid? I mean, I'd argue you're stupid for ignoring all the evidence I've given you, but, you know, that's cool. So please like or dislike or subscribe or not subscribe, and have a good one until next time.